I will leave.
Okay.
You can, yes, because I haven't prepared anything with a timer. So yes, so I will make the title of the debate is whether evolution refutes design, intelligent design, and I will start making some kind of opening statement. Just okay. So it's not about refuting design. Richard Dawkins famously said, although atheists might have been logically tenable before Darwin, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. End of quote. Before Darwin, the most convincing argument for the existence of God was the apparent design we see in living things. Darwin showed this is done by mere natural processes unattended, eliminating therefore the number one reason people believing in God until then, and also paved the way for this type of model to be applied in cosmology. Scientists now talk about cosmological natural selection that can potentially explain the fine tuning of the universe. So now we have a new model that can be applied in other fields of science. Although we cannot exclude God initiated life, we know once life began, biological organisms, including humans, evolved from simple forms of life. That brings serious doubt to contradicting theological claims. My interlocutor, a refuting Orientalist, in a late video he made, he said that atheists are desperate to disprove design. Desperation implies that intelligent design is already established, and atheists try desperately to refute it. That is, with all due respect, the throne delusion. Um, sorry, one. Okay, so sorry about that. I have some open applications. He projects. So that is the throne delusion. He projects his personal confidence in God as an empirical reality. The truth is, evolution is empirically substantiated, intelligent design is not. All intelligent design proponents do are philosophical arguments and God of the gaps arguments, assuming that somehow intelligent design wins by default without the need for empirical evidence. Yet, if there were evidence for intelligent design, scientists would have considered consciousness made the universe the same way scientists are now searching for signs of alien intelligent species in the universe. It's a popular polemic among Muslim apologists to accuse science as a principle and the scientific community being biased, when science, in fact, is a system exactly made to eliminate biases as much as possible, of course, and the scientific community is the less biased, and certainly less biased than Muslim apologists who have a theological agenda to undermine evolution. I personally exposed, in quote marks, the bias of Muslim apologists in my videos, where I've shown the most popular anti-evolutionary Muslim apologists admitting their bias with black and white words. Something we need to ask is why the evidence for intelligent design are quotes and philosophy and not true empirical demonstrable evidence. Let me give you an example of evidence that would have convinced scientists for intelligent design. Let's say the fossil record showed all species appeared at the same time without intermediate fossils. That totally supports the Quranic claim. Okay, all species appeared at the same time by God. I assure you, if we had this kind of evidence, most scientists would have accepted intelligent design. Yet that is exactly the evidence we don't find. It's a common accusation lately in Muslim circles that scientists stubbornly resist evidence to promote atheism. And they, the Muslim apologists, are the free thinkers, just following the evidence. That is outrageous. Obviously, the exact opposite is the truth. In contrast to the claims that evolution is artificially kept in life by social pressures or even atheist conspiracies, the truth is that evolution was established on the face of vicious social pressures by religious institutions and individuals. No other scientific theory, in fact, in history, was fought so viciously. So much so that evolution is the only scientific theory that has been put on trial in literal court cases. The monkey trial in 1925 by the state of Tennessee against the high school teacher John Scopes for violating the state's Butler Act, which prohibited the teaching of evolution in public schools. The Dover trial. Okay, so after what happened the Dover trial? After a Dover high school student painted a mirror depicting the evolution of humans from apes, this mirror was removed and destroyed. A huge controversy began in Dover that ended in a court case, where a federal judge ruled that creation science did not qualify as a scientific theory, striking down Arkansas's law requiring equal time for creation and evolution. Intelligent design, the court said, is a religious view, not a scientific theory, according to U.S. District Judge John E. Jones III in his historic decision. Another example of intelligent design proponents attempting to advance their particular religious beliefs is made very clear in the infamous Wedge document produced by the Discovery Institute, the organization at the forefront of intelligent design. The strategy describes how to promote their personal religious beliefs by denigrating science and promoting supernatural intelligent design as competing theory. School board members, okay, then Buckingham and Alan Bonswell concluded the Discovery Institute before voting to change the biological curriculum. So, what I'm trying to say is that on one hand, we have actual court rulings exposing the true conspiracy to undermine evolution. On the other hand, we have misquotations, sophistry, and deception trying to falsely accuse atheists, okay, that are engaging in a conspiracy to promote evolution. Okay, so one such example of Muslim apologists using sophistry and deception to promote evolution is Sobur Ahmed, the most popular Muslim polemicist against evolution, using popular criticism against neo-Darwinism to pretend evolution as a whole, as a scientific theory, is in dispute, while misquoting, or better, misusing the philosophy of science to undermine evolution. There is certainly bias and conspiracies, but those are against evolution, not for evolution. So this will be my opening statement. I know it was kind of large, but anyhow, I can repeat what I said in our discussions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for that. Just give me one moment, then I'll start.
Of course, certainly.
Okay, Bismillah. So, of course, we disagree on this issue. I don't think anyone will be surprised by that, right? But here's my position. Firstly, I don't care whether evolution is taught in school or not. This is an American issue. It's not an issue for me. Secondly, here's my position that belief in Darwinism is based on nothing but blind faith, and that basically atheists have been lying for a century and a half, and I'll give examples for this, and that evolution is actually proven false, and the reason for that is, and basically for that I'll use references from atheist evolutionary biologists. They will not say evolution is false, but they will say the point I'm making at least. So firstly, the point was brought up about court cases and social pressures, right? I mean, how does that prove evolution is right? You can't just because atheists are trying to do basic having court cases, right? That doesn't refute the bias involved in it. Now, firstly, the topic of the debate is, can evolutionary biology refute design, right? I'll give three references for the simple fact that atheist evolutionary biologists assume design is false. They are not proving it, they are assuming it. First reference is from S.C. Todd, and by the way, I'm happy to link any of these references if anyone asks. S.C. Todd, Correspondence to Nature, in Nature magazine, he was published in 1999. He said, even if all the data points to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. Of course, the scientist as an individual is free to embrace a reality that transcends naturalism. So, circular reasoning, I mean, they are assuming there is no design. If you are assuming there is no design, you can't prove there is no design. Second reference is from Francis Crick. This is the guy who discovered DNA. What Mad Pursuit, 1988. Biologists must constantly keep in mind what they see was not designed but rather evolved. They are assuming there is no design. They are not proving there is no design. Now, third reference in this regard is from Richard Lewontin, and Socrates Son has seen all of these because he has seen my video. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanation, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. So, firstly, these clowns are assuming there is no design. It's not something they are bothering to prove. Secondly, basically, Socrates' son said that design is not science, right? Or intelligent design is not science. Uh, Again, I don't care how you define science or not. Uh, how you define science is not my problem. But if you are saying that, there's a problem for you, because then design is assumed to be false. It's something that is assumed. You cannot prove something by assuming it first. That is the definition of circular reasoning, right? There is no way around this point. Now, basically, he made the point that there is absolutely massive evidence for Darwinian evolution, and that this is basically science and the Muslims are biased. Firstly, everyone is biased. I mean, this is not something controversial. Everyone is biased. And the bias of atheists in this regard can be just seen from the three references I'm making. And let's add a fourth one, the point he made that evolution, Darwinism makes Richard Dawkins an intellectually satisfied atheist. Why is there no scientist making such a claim about any other theory of science? I mean, I don't need to I don't need to give extra evidence for the claim about the bias. The reference he quoted already shows the bias of Dawkins and others, right? This is not something complicated. More than that, Darwinists have been lying in one way or another for a century about various supposed proofs for evolution, right? Now, there are basically four reasons, no, and you can add or reduce these reasons, right, based on circumstances that someone basically that basically experts of a field should not be taken seriously. Bias, dishonesty, desperation, false assumption. I think the bias part is proven. Now let's go to the dishonesty. In the past century or so, one time or another, Darwinists have been using supposed proofs for evolution that have been lies. And this is something that is not just me making it up. Even atheist evolutionary biologists will make this point. I'll give one example here, Haeckel's embryo. Darwin thought this was the supposed strongest proof for evolution, right? But it was widely acknowledged in Haeckel's own time and in our time, basically throughout the past century, that Haeckel lied. He tampered with the embryos. He basically made them look alike, and he excluded the first part of this embryo development because that didn't fit with Darwin's theory. So this is just one example. And by the way, if you want, I can quote references from Stephen Jay Gould in this regard, who is a major authority in this field. and I can quote references from even more atheists in this regard. So that's just one example. I guess another example would be the Kettlewell's experiment, right? The peppered moth. It's a famous experiment, basically, where they change their colors. They supposedly, those moths, because of pollution, they changed their colors, and this was supposed evidence for evolution. Problem is, everyone acknowledges that Kettlewell lied. Even atheist evolutionary biologists will recognize that Kettlewell lied. For example, Jerry Coyne, famous atheist, right? He will say that basically this was like finding out Santa is not real a second time. This was as much of a shock to that clown uh, because of the extent of the lie. So this is not something I'm making up. This is something that even atheist evolutionary biologists will recognize. And there are not just one or two examples in this regard. There are numerous examples. For example, let's just take another one, right? The famous Miller-Urey experiment. This has been promoted for half a century as supposedly showing the origin of life. I can even bring atheist evolutionary biologists who will recognize that this does not prove that life can originate in early Earth. Why? Because the conditions used in the Miller-Urey experiment are completely different for those used in early Earth. So this is an example of their lying, right? Three examples of their lies. Now I'll give just one more example in this regard, and I think this is the single biggest problem for Darwinism. The fossil record buries Darwinism, and I can list dozens of references in this regard. And I'll just quote one, right? This is from Stephen Jay Gould. The reason these guys, basically, the reason that punctuated equilibrium exists as a theory is because the fossil record is discontinuous. Darwin assumed, and this is something that Richard Dawkins and many other evolutionary biologists also take, for evolution to be true, there needs to be gradualism, that species slightly change into another. But this doesn't happen. Okay, this is from the first paper. This is from Stephen J. Gould's book, Wonderful Life, right? Page 54. By the Earth scorns with our simplifications and becomes much more interesting in its derision. The history of life, listen to this part, is not a continuum of development but a record punctuated by brief, sometimes geologically instantaneous episodes of mass extinction and subsequent diversification. Now, I will just quote now critics of Stephen Jay Gould, who will also acknowledge that many species in the fossil records appear abruptly. They don't appear basically like in the way Darwin described. The evolutionary biologist Brian Charles, Russell Land, and Montgomery Slatkin wrote in 1982 that some of the genetic mechanisms that have been proposed to explain the abrupt appearance and prolonged stasis of many fossil species are conspicuously lacking in empirical support. I'm happy to provide references for this point as well. Now I'll go with my final problem with evolution. Evolution basically assumes Darwinian evolution that similarity equals common descent. This is an assumption, and by the way, this is the underlying assumption in embryology, in DNA, in most of the evidences for Darwinism. It is assumed that similarity equals common descent. This is a false assumption, and there are actually a massive amount of cases where similarity cannot possibly be due to common descent. I'll just give two references for this. Just one moment. Two recent books that have listed hundreds of examples of similarities that are not due to common descent are basically Simon Conway Morris's book Life Solutions and morphologist George McGee's Convergent Evolution. And Conway Morris goes as far to say that convergence is ubiquitous. There's an absolutely massive amount of cases of similarity not equaling common descent, or similarity that cannot possibly be due to common descent. So I think these are clear-cut reasons why evolution is simply false, and maybe we can go into some of the other points in the discussion. I'll end my opening statement.
Okay, very nice. So we had too much information that you need to repeat some of this information in order to be able to address all of it. Okay. So you said something that everybody is biased. So that is something which is certainly true, but science is a principle, is a method exactly made to eliminate biases. So we can say that everybody is biased, but science, this is exactly what science is doing. It's a method exactly made to eliminate biases. So we are sure that science, as a principle, as an institution, is less biased than religious institutions. Isn't that right?
No, because I think the bias of science in this regard, especially, can easily be shown. But more than that, you are saying that science was purposefully designed to eliminate bias, right? The
Yes.
problem with this claim is, firstly, you need to show that it eliminates bias. Secondly, just because someone tries to do something, right, that doesn't mean they do it successfully. So if you're claiming science is by default, there's absolutely no bias or very minimum bias, or that bias doesn't affect scientific propaganda or whatever, right? You need to give some sort of reasons for it.
Yes, the reasons are, first of all, the scientific method is a rigorous methodological investigation of the natural world. And okay, so the method itself is very rigorous, and it's self-correcting, let's say, and the scientific community is very strict about biases. Okay, very strict. Okay, so a scientist might lose his job if his colleagues discover that he was engaging in deceiving the scientific community. So what I'm trying to say, something that is not at all controversial, is that the scientific community, in contrast to other communities like the Muslim community, the Muslim apologist community, it's much more committed to truth. Okay. On the other hand, we have clear evidence that in Muslim apologists, that they don't care about truth; they care about to promote their particular religious view. So they will, for example, they will admit that openly. So they don't even hide it. The most popular, for example, uh,
uh Socrates sir, before you go on to Sabur Ahmad, and I'm glad that you will, but
yes,
just before that, let me make one point.
yes. So you want to respond to this point? This is what you say now,
Yes,
of course.
just respond. Let me respond to the earlier point. Okay, so you said that science basically eliminates bias. That if a scientist is deceiving others, that he's basically kicked out. But these are just claims. Some sort of argumentation or some sort of evidence needs to substantiate those claims. Now, I'll give one example of basically this being false. That scientists are promoting lies knowingly. For example, in the book Why Evolution is True by Jerry Coyne, I think it was published in 2009, right? Jerry Coyne is again reporting the basically promoting the lies that human or embryos in their earliest forms, vertebrate embryos, look all alike, and this proves evolution. Firstly, there are philosophical problems with this, but I won't go into it, right? Scientists widely recognize that the embryos in their early stages are not at all alike. And just to prove this point, I am happy to link P.Z. Myers, who is an atheist evolutionary biologist. He's very aggressive against religion, right? But he will himself admit that in the earlier stages, embryos don't look similar, and this is widely known. So this is an example of Jerry Coyne, an evolutionary biologist, a famous evolutionary biologist, explicitly lying. Moreover, I have an earlier quote from Jerry Coyne, who acknowledges that this is not the case. Embryos are not like this. But then in his 2009 book, he's repeating the same lies again and again. So, I mean, this is self-evident dishonesty. And if you want, I'm happy to link references in this regard.
Yes, I don't know the specific case, but something is certain, that in science there is something called peer review. In other words, people cannot just say whatever they like without being peer reviewed, and their views be considered as science. Okay, so in order for something to be considered as a valid scientific theory or position, it must give some kind of evidential. It must have some kind of evidential proof that can be that is demonstrable. It can be repeated by other scientists, and everything is peer reviewed. In contrast, now, the most prominent Muslim apologist when it comes to evolution, Ahmed Sobur, you obviously know him. Isn't that right?
Yeah,
Is he the most prominent Muslim apologist when it comes to evolution?
yeah,
The most
certainly.
known? Yes, he has a channel called Darwinian Delusion. He publicly said in a classroom in front of students, he said that uh, uh, we believe that he has blind faith, in fact. So he will believe everything if the prophet said so. Okay, so he admits, in fact, publicly that he's got blind faith. And although he then goes to say that evolution uh, is let's say a valid scientific theory, he then goes on and say that we won't believe evolution because it goes we can accept evolution as some kind of let's say instrumental um, principle, let's say, but we don't accept evolution as actual truth because of our religious beliefs. So we have two things. We have on one side religious Muslim apologists admitting they are biased and they have blind faith and they are against evolution because of their theology. And on the other hand, we have science, which is a principle exactly made to eliminate biases. It's peer reviewed and it's okay. And the scientific community is by definition the community which is less biased than all other communities. Now, my question to you is: do you doubt science even when it comes to let's say medical science? Do you doubt medical science as well?
Uh, okay, there were a bunch of points there. I will address the medical science part a bit later after I address the part about Suhoor Ahmed. Firstly, he said that basically, even if science currently says this, right, we will stick to the Islamic position. And that's right. Why? Because science changes. This is something no one denies. Literally, no one denies. Even atheist philosophers of science will agree that science changes a lot all the time. So it's not something that gives absolute certainty. More than that, as for the point about things being instrumentally true, right? Go watch Sabur Ahmed's debate with James Fodder. He's an atheist, I think. I don't know. He's an atheist scientist, right? He will agree to the same point that the position instrumentalism exists among even atheist scientists, or this is not something due to religious bias. So this point doesn't work. Thirdly, as for the claim about Darwinism being true, right, or that this being proven with science, we can go into the reasons why it's not. I gave some reasons for that, and if you want, we can discuss those as well. And I gave examples of atheists lying and being biased as well. Now you said that science is basically peer reviewed, so it can't be wrong, right? I don't think you will agree with that as well. You yourself won't agree with that. Peer review is only reliable if the people doing the peer review are honest. For example, if the people doing the peer review were all Muslim apologists, you wouldn't take it seriously. If they were Christian apologists, you won't take that seriously either. If the scientists who are doing peer review are lying, are making false claims, are making baseless assumptions, and this can be proven they are doing these things, then why should anyone trust them? As for the point about medical science, right? Uh, I don't have an issue with medical science, but it doesn't prove Darwinism. It does nothing to prove Darwinism. For example, I'll give you a very simple reason, right? I agree that things change over time. I don't have an issue with that. Bacteria and other things change over time, etc., etc. The atheist claim is that change is due to natural selection. This is something they can't prove. In fact, even in any debates, right, atheists will try to argue that because things look similar, they have a common descent, but they will hardly, if ever, argue for natural selection being true. This is something they just assume. So I don't see how your point works.
Yes, but I did the comparison with medical science because what we see now is that in one hand you are very fast to condemn or to imply that scientists, when it comes to evolution, are lying, and on the other hand, you immediately said that scientists, when it comes to medical care, they I don't have a problem with that. So we see on you some kind of bias that when it comes to evolution, then you start to doubt science. But when it comes to medical care and other fields of science, you don't doubt their honesty. What I wanted to say is that the peers in science is worth based. You cannot be a peer in the scientific field without having proven yourself in the university. You did your masters, you are teaching in so there is a process before you become a peer, that this process has something to say whether you are honest and efficient in your field. But you said something about science uh, doesn't prove what was that exactly. uh,
Certainty.
yes, science doesn't deal with absolute certainty. That's true. You said science is changing, therefore we can okay, but that is a misconception. Although science is in fact changing and doesn't deal with absolute truth, that doesn't mean it's not the most reliable way to truth with God. Okay, okay, so something not
With what?
changing.
Can you just repeat?
Yes, although science is in fact changing and it doesn't deal with absolute truth, that's true. That doesn't mean that science is not the most reliable way to truth with God. So it's like saying, okay, so science is still the most reliable way to truth. Certainly more reliable than dogma. Okay, now what you did is you did some kind of uh, wrong rationalization, and now you imply that dogma is more reliable than science. Do you believe that dogma is more reliable than science?
Okay, I'll address your multiple points and I'll answer this question about dogma being more reliable than science, right? Firstly, you said that basically you again said there's a method for checking people who are peer reviewed, right? And so they have to be honest. No, because let's first say that there were Muslim apologists all involved in it, right? You wouldn't claim they are honest by default. You're not arguing for this, you're just making more and more assumption that scientists are going to be honest, while I am giving empirical reasons why scientists are not honest at times. And by the way, I'm not making that up myself. For example, the part about Haeckel's embryo being fraudulent, right? Even atheist evolutionary biologists will admit it. As for the part about basically the Kettlewell, right? That Kettlewell experiment. Even atheist evolutionary biologists will admit this, and this happens a lot. So it's not something I'm just accusing of them. I'm using atheist evolutionary biologists who themselves admit that the other evolutionary biologists were lying. Secondly, you said that I shouldn't doubt Darwinists because I don't doubt medical scientists or doctors, right? There's a difference between two things. Darwinism is just science. The medical doctors are also dealing with observations. For example, and I'll explain the difference between them. Whether the earth is round or flat, that is an observation. We can see it, it's a clear cut fact, it's round, right? But which theory of time is correct or which theory of gravity is correct, that is science. It's not an observation. There are evidences for and against, and that science changes all the time. In fact, the current, for example, the current main things in physics, right? General relativity and quantum mechanics. These two cannot be reconciled. These are contradictory, so they will necessarily change. Science changes all the time. As for science being the way to truth, why? I mean, science gives false reasons all the time. And this is something that even atheists will admit, that philosophy of science shows that, or history of science shows that science shows false stuff all the time. So why is it the most reliable method? Secondly, you said that is dogma more reliable than science? No, dogma isn't, but rational reasoning, philosophical reasoning, I think can be more reliable than science for the simple reason that it is much less likely to change. Now, you made one more point that Sabur Ahmad was basically taking it on blind faith, right? He's not. There are actually massive amount of reasons for thinking Islam is true. And as far as Darwinism is concerned, right? Most of its assumptions are being challenged. For example, there were articles in Nature magazine that not all mutations are random. This is a fundamental assumption of Darwinism, and it is contradicted by Nature magazine, the main magazine in science. Darwinism predicts gradualism, yet paleontologists and even evolutionary biologists will admit that the pattern in the fossil record is abrupt, diametrically opposite to what Darwin thought. And I can bring dozens of references in this regard, not just one or two. So again, we are not taking things on blind faith, and I think I've addressed the rest of your points as well.
Yes. So reason alone doesn't lead to truth unless it's things like we exist or fundamental laws of logic, A equals A or no, this kind of stuff. So, for example, how if we have an argument, this argument might be logically consistent, reasonable, but unless we investigate whether its premises are true, this doesn't lead to truth. Reason alone doesn't lead to truth. So my question to you, okay, so how you know the premises of what you are investigating are truth without investigating reality. So what you in fact are doing, and people like Sobur Ahmed, is they undermine the truth-bearing ability of science for, and they overstate the truth-bearing ability of dogma. So the other thing is something. If something doesn't change, that doesn't mean it's true. There are false things that doesn't change. They are always false. So it's not a good criteria to say that because this doesn't change is true, and because science might be proven wrong in the future is false. Okay, that deals. It's like saying we have no means to investigate reality, because if we are to assume that it's like saying therefore we can't really know anything. That is true, that we can't really know anything in an absolute sense, but that doesn't mean we don't have advances in science like medical care. For example, now that we are talking on Clubhouse on the internet, obviously science works for us to be able, and obviously science is reliable. How else we are now able to talk when
Socrates,
you're.
can I
Yes,
just
please.
address
Yes,
these points?
of course.
Otherwise, they will get lost. Okay. Your first point was that I think you made two or three points. First point was that because science changes, right, that doesn't mean it's the best method of truth. If it is giving false points again and again, then it's not a very reliable method for absolute truth. For example, and science working doesn't mean it's true. I'll give one example. Phlogiston was a theory in the 18th century that was used to discover, I think, nitrogen or oxygen, one of those, right? It worked, but that does that mean it's true? No. Secondly, you said that we need some sort of empirical evidence to know things. No, we don't. I'll give you a very simple example. Can you count to infinity? No. Why? Because let's suppose you start counting 1, 2, 3, 10, 100, million, billion, trillion. Any number you count, there will always be a number ahead of it. You can never actually count to infinity. Now, this is something you don't need empirical evidence to know. This is something you can know without empirical evidence. So, you don't need empirical evidence to actually know things. And I think you agree with this point because in the last debate, you were talking about science and rational reasoning. So, in the problem of evil debate. So I think even you agree that we don't need empirical evidence to know things.
If I may, I
You can
said, if
respond to this.
yes, so I said that unless we are talking about things like I exist or fundamental laws of logic that are self-evident, that they cannot have evidence because they are fundamental, in other words, unless we are talking about those things, for everything else, including evolution, including medical care, including everything else we know as humankind, we need empirical evidence. Let me tell you why. Because now, if I make an argument now and I say, for example, a dog, let me give you an example. A cat is larger than a dog. A dog is larger than an elephant. Therefore, a cat is larger than an elephant. That is a logically consistent argument, but what's wrong with this argument? Its premises are wrong. In other words, they don't represent reality. They don't represent empirical reality in order to be accurate. So when you overstate logic over science, what you in fact are saying is that you are not really addressing truth because without the feedback from reality, we cannot establish truth. So we need both things. We need also logic and science. But what we notice with the Muslim apologists uh,
Socrates,
making,
before you go to Muslim apologists, just let me respond to this point. Okay, thanks. You said that only for fundamental laws of logic we need logical reasoning, right? For other things we need empirical evidence. Except I don't think that's true because I gave you an example. We can't count to infinity. That is not a fundamental law of logic, yet it can be proven without empirical evidence. Don't need an infinite amount of things, infinite amount of balls or bats or whatever to know that you can't count to infinity. So we can know things without empirical evidence. Secondly, you said that I was saying that because science can't prove things, right, or science is not certain, therefore it's false. I don't think I ever said that. I don't think any Muslim takes that position. The position that we do take generally is that science is uncertain. There's a difference between something being right and something being wrong and something being unproven. These are three different things. So that would be my response. You can make the point about Muslim apologists, right? And then I want to go to some of the points I brought, such as fossil records and examples of atheists lying.
of course, what you said about infinity, again, infinity is it's a number, okay? It's a number in quote marks. It's a potentiality number. Infinity is again a blunt fact of reality. It's a fundamental thing, like a number. Okay, so so I didn't include uh, in my what infinity, but okay, that infinity is also included in. I said we exist is something that we are absolutely certain without evidence. I said that fundamental laws of logic we are certain without evidence. Infinity is also included in those things, but outside those things. Uh, what I wanted to, okay, so I want to ask you a direct question. We are not certain, in an absolute sense, that the Earth is a sphere. Maybe tomorrow, because science is changing, potentially, we might discover that, let's say, the Earth is not a sphere. Are we therefore uh, unreasonable to say that we, do, we don't know, in fact, whether the Earth is round? So, what I'm trying to say is, my dear sir, is with this kind of mindset, we can't really know anything. Okay, so we can't really know. We cannot even know whether the Earth is round. But On the other hand, we do actually know that science is reliable. So the mere fact that we are now talking online demonstrates exactly the reliability of science. So, what I'm trying to say is this kind of philosophy is although it's useful, but it's some kind of distracting at what we can really know in order um, to safeguard our faith. That is not the way to go. It's like undermining science altogether to safeguard our faith. That I don't
Can
think
I
that's
address this
reasonable.
point?
Yes.
Okay, you said that doubting science is basically, or doubting evolution is basically like doubting round Earth. No, round Earth will never change because it's an observation. There are difference between observation and science. Science is based on observations and it's an explanation for those observations. And there's not necessarily only one explanation for the observations. There can be other explanation as well. But an observation itself will remain an observation. Earth will never magically become flat because we can see it's round. It's observable. This is not like evolution because even in evolution, right? There are even among atheist evolutionary biologists nowadays there are different theories popping up that basically challenge Darwinism, such as although they are not as prominent as Darwinism. One example would be neo-Lamarckian evolution, other would be natural genetic engineering. There are no scientists in peer-reviewed journals who are saying that the Earth is flat. These are two completely different things. Secondly, you are saying that we can talk on a computer. This means science is true. No, it means science is instrumentally useful. It can get results, but getting results and getting to truth are two different things because of the example of phlogiston. Now, I think we have discussed this point more than enough, right? Now, I want to go into the points about basically the problems with Darwinism. One, the fossil record contradicts it massively. Secondly, that basically it assumes similarity equals common descent. So all of it is basically based on circular reasoning. Uh, if you want, I can repeat those points, or you can respond
No, I
if you
remember.
remember them.
So, first of all, you said the fossil record. Is the fossil record observable, empirical, observable?
Yes,
Okay, so
like we have
science.
fossils. We
So
have
evolution is
fossils.
okay. So evolution is also based on observable evidence, empirical evidence. It doesn't differ at all with other fields of science. Then you said something about homology. In other words, the assumption that similarities imply or are because of common descent. But evolution doesn't only see similarities, it also see gradual similarities, not time crossing similarities, and gradual, not time crossing, and time consistent similarities. In other words, scientists don't just say, those look like are similar, therefore they are the same. They don't do that. That is, in fact, an insult, a mockery of science. That is implying that scientists naive do naive logical fallacies that, like the what is this fallacy? Like the same, just
Circular
because
reasoning.
not secularism. What was the sign? Anyway, I cannot remember now the logical fallacy, but that implies that science is naive. Okay, that implies that scientists are just naive. They simply say, those two look similar, therefore they are similar. I know this argument was made by. There was a recent controversy, speakers' corner debate whether science only deal with homology, but that is. Do you understand what I just said? Doesn't science don't only deal with homology. Let me give you a real example. So scientists dig from a specific uh, place in Africa, and they dig 8 different skulls. Those skulls were not just similar in traits, in physical traits, they were also time consistent. In other words, in layers in the ground representing time scales, they were consistent on those layers. They were also gradual. Okay, so and they were not time crossing. You didn't find one skull in another time layer. So this kind of evidence are not just homology; they are additional evidence. Moreover, we have the biological evidence, which are additional evidence. So there is a
Let me
quality.
just address the point about this point first, then you go into the biological evidence.
Yes.
Okay. Firstly, you are saying that it's not just homology and that we discovered similar skulls somewhere and they are similar and they are in a similar time place, right? But this is what is assumed, that because they are similar, they have a common descent. This is a fundamental assumption. I mean, this is the reason human and chimps are thought to have a common ancestor and not, for example, humans and insects are thought to have a common ancestor, a recent common ancestor. This is the thing that's the fundamental assumption. More than that, and this is assumed, more than that, there are numerous cases in biological life where similarity exists without common descent. So I mean, this is like arguing, for example, making an argument and the first premise being refuted over and over again by empirical evidence. There are absolutely massive amount of examples where similarity is present without common descent, and this is the only thing is assumed. More than that, even when it comes to genetics, for instance, this is what is being assumed. Why? Because what are they looking at? Whether the genes are similar or they are different. Not only are they not looking at anything else, it is not possible to consider anything else. The only thing you can consider is either similarity or differences. And this is an assumption. You cannot treat an assumption as an argument. So this would be my response to this. I think you can just make one point and then both of us can make closing statements because I have to go. Maybe we'll have a debate later on fossil record.
Okay. So about this point, uh, okay, homology implies that just because they have common characteristics, that necessarily means they have common descent. Okay, so but that is not an assumption because there are other things outside that also uh, scientists include to conclude common descent, not just homology. Okay, there are other things like the ones I mentioned, like for example, gradual, not time crossing, and time consistent, and other qualified differences, factors, like for example DNA, the biological factors. So scientists, in other words, are not naive. They don't say, they look the same, therefore the same. No, that implies some kind of naivete in science. It's a mockery of science. So I insist in this point. I know you want, yeah, but and I want to ask you, sir, do you think that let's say fossils being gradual are part of homology? Are
Okay.
fossils
Okay, I'll address both these points. Firstly, again, they are assuming similarity, and if you want, I can give references of even philosophers on this point. They are assuming because they are similar, they have a common descent. There is no other option here. Secondly, I think your last point was that Can you just repeat your last point? It slipped out my
Yes,
mind.
okay. So,
You
no,
asked a
I
question.
said only about homology. Yes, okay. The homology is an assumption that, no, because, okay, so homology is a principle inside evolutionary biology. So, people that engage in this principle, okay, inside evolutionary biology, they assume that homology implies common descent, but that's because it's inside the biological. So when I'm in a classroom doing evolutionary biology, when I say about when I talk about homology, obviously I imply common descent, but that doesn't mean that scientists conclude common descent just because of homology. So uh, an error in in reasoning. So
Okay,
never mind.
Socrates
Okay,
son, you just
yeah.
address this point. Then you make your closing statement. I'll also make mine because you went first, right? So I should end. Let me just address this point, right? For the last time. So you are basically saying that it is I am accusing science of basically being scientists of being naive, but this is what they are assuming. You said that there is a biological principle as well that shows similarity equals common descent. Uh, okay, what is it? You're just taking similarities, and I mean this is the reason humans and chips are thought to have common ancestors and not humans and insects. More than that, there are absolutely massive amount of cases in biological life where similarities exist that cannot possibly be due to common descent. And by the way, in DNA, this is the only thing, or genetics, this is the only thing that is being checked. Either you can check the genes are similar or you can check they are different. It's not that this is just an assumption, right? This is the only possible option. You can either check similarity, you can, or you can check differences. If you think there is something else they can check, what else they can check? Now you can make your closing statement, and then I'll make mine. I'll just keep it short. Uh, I have to go, but you can make your closing statement now.
Okay. In my closing statement, I would like to address methodological naturalism. Um, okay. So. Anyway, what I want. Okay. If something doesn't manifest in reality, is indistinguishable from non-existing. Okay, so then we have immaterial things like feelings and concepts that, although they exist in reality in a loose kind of sense, science doesn't directly deal with them because of their subjective, elusive, and often personal nature. Okay, those are not supernatural; they are transcendent or immaterial. And secondly, religion makes a hard claim of reality. God is not merely a concept or a feeling, he exists in cosmology and manifests in reality through revelation. So that is a lame excuse for theists to rationalize away their lack of evidence and scientific accuracy. Okay, so that is what I will say about methodological naturalism. So we had, I, I know this subject is very wide. So in order to have some kind of resolution, we need to be more precise, to have a more precise, uh, I don't know, theme to address. But what we see is that God is conveniently hiding. Okay, so that is okay. So that is my closing statement. I don't have something specific, unless you want me to share something to address, a more specific thing to address about methodological naturalism. This is the thing we didn't address. This is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think.
So yeah, to address again the so what, for whatever to exist, it must have some kind of essence. If God is just a concept in our mind, that doesn't mean he really exists. So it's not really about science having biases for methodological naturalism. It's about, by definition, concept to not exist outside our minds. Okay, so God might, might have facilitated evolution, but that doesn't mean, okay, evolution is not, anyway. So okay, so that was my closing statement.
Okay, I'll start mine. So it was an interesting debate. I didn't think that some of the topics that should have gotten more attention did. For example, the examples of basically common atheist lies or even the fossil record. Maybe we'll have a debate later on that. But I think next week we are supposed to have a debate on the topic who has the moral high ground, Islam or atheism, right?
Or liberalism, or
Yeah,
maybe,
liberalism.
yeah, something like that. Yes.
Islam or liberalism, who has the moral high ground. So, inshallah, I have to go now. It was an interesting debate, and inshallah, we'll speak later.
Thank you.